Like most crime writers that I know, in fact, like most writers that I know, I'm a frustrated rock star. I would much rather be in a successful band than be a writer, but I had no musical ability. I tried. When I was a kid, I invented a band in my head called the Amoebas, and I was their lead singer, Ian Kaput, and I would write their lyrics, which eventually became poetry, and that was how I got into poetry. Later on, as a student, I joined a punk, well, they weren't punk, new wave band called the Dancing Pigs. We lasted 6 months and then split up. Eventually, in one of the Rebus novels, I needed a huge U2 type band to be playing a Greenpeace gig, and I chose the Dancing Pigs. So in fiction, we made it huge. Rebus in the first book, I was appalled to learn when I reread it recently, listens to classical music in the car. I'd forgotten that, and a little bit of jazz. And it took me a few books to realize that there were several things. One, there was another crime writer around at the time who knew a lot about jazz, and his detective listened to jazz, so I thought, Rebus can't do that. Why don't I make it easy on myself and have him listen to what I listen to? So keeping in mind, keeping conscious of the fact that he is 10 years, at least 10 years, if not 15 years older than me, or he was in the early days. I sort of formed his musical taste as being 60s and 70s rock, and it hadn't moved on much since then, with the possible exception of someone like Jackie Leaven, who's a great singer-songwriter, Scottish, and Rebus would probably appreciate his kind of musicianship. So he does listen to Jackie Leaven. I mean, that came about because I'd listened to Jackie's albums. I thought he had very muscular writing style, great voice. I thought Rebus would like these songs of hard men, working class men who can't show their feelings. I thought right up Rebus's alleyway. I wrote him into one of the books. Rebus listened to Jackie Leaven and then didn't realize that Jackie was a fan of the books. He was in Bergen in Norway on tour. He was reading one of my books. He saw himself mentioned. He got in touch with my publisher. We got to meet each other. We ended up working together. We made an album together. And it was great. And then when he died in November last year, I thought, I'm going to call the new book Standing in Another Man's Grave, because it's a lyric of his. And then I thought, oh no, it isn't. I've been mishearing it all these years. It's actually Standing in Another Man's Rain. So it was a misheard lyric, but it gave me the title of the book. When I got the idea for the new book, it wasn't a Rebus novel. It was a novel about loss. It was a novel about a parent looking for their child who went missing a decade ago and they couldn't give them up. And they'd start to mythologize the loss. And it was about the people they would meet on this stretch of road, the stretch of road where their child went missing. And then it became a novel about the road. It was going to be a story about the road and the life that the road held, all the different people who used it. And then I thought, well, if a parent is searching for a missing child and the child has been missing for a long time, they would be haunting Cold Case Unit to ask the cops if they're still actively investigating. And I knew that's what Rebus was doing. After he retired, I knew that he would apply to join a real cold case unit that exists in Edinburgh. And so I suddenly thought, oh, this could be a Rebus book. And the worry then was well, many worries. One was, would people just sniffily say, oh, it's just because you're lazy, or it's just because your other books haven't been successful, and so on. And the other worry, main one, was, could I still write about him? Was his voice still there? Had he left the building? And when I sat down and wrote the first 2 or 3 pages, I was very nervous. But he was there. The voice came back very quickly. It was like he'd been sitting in a little compartment in my head, and he'd just been waiting to be let out to play. And the one-liners came back, the cynicism came back, the smoking and the drinking. It was all present and correct, and it was such a relief. And the people who've read the book already, I'm getting tweets and emails about it. People saying to me at events I do, they all say the same thing. It's great to have him back. And it isn't a lazy book. Nobody seems to think it's a lazy book. What happened just after I started writing the book was that I found out that they were going to change the retirement age for cops. And that cops who had retired could reapply. And I thought, whoa, Rebus would do that. He's working cold cases, but he is a civilian. He would apply to come back into CID as a detective. If he does that, he'll be vetted. Who would he be vetted by? Oh my God, he'd be vetted by Malcolm Fox of the Internal Affairs Department, the guy I've been writing about for the past 2 books. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. I can have Rebus and Fox meet. Then I thought, oh, but wait a minute. Fox, the kind of cop Fox is antithetical to Rebus. And so he wouldn't want Rebus back. Rebus would hate him because he's internal affairs, and he's internal affairs, so he doesn't want a maverick like Rebus coming back into the police and infecting everyone around him. the police force has moved on. It can't take mavericks like that anymore. And I thought, well, that makes, if Rebus is the protagonist, that means that Fox is the antagonist. He's the bad guy. He's going to have to be the bad guy in this book. And I wrote the first draft, second draft, third draft, showed it to my editor, and she said, oh my God, I don't like Fox. He's suddenly the bad guy. Can you smooth the edges a little bit? So the finished book, he's actually less antagonistic than he was in the early drafts. I think what I've done is, I've given him reasons not to want Rebus back in the police, good reasons, for personal and professional reasons. And also he tries to protect Siobhan. He says to Siobhan, look, you don't want this guy back in your life, your career is going places, that might all come to an abrupt halt if Rebus is back. He's trying to protect her. It's not cynical on his part, he really believes that. Could I write about him again as the hero? I don't know. I take it one book at a time. I don't know what the next book is going to be. Is it going to be Rebus, Fox, Siobhan, something completely different? I have no idea. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I'm going to start, I make it up as I go along. There's not a kind of very clear structure when I begin writing a book. I feel my way in the first draft towards what the book wants to be. And it turned out during the first draft that what this book was going to be was a book about a guy, Rebus, whose world has changed out of all recognition. He doesn't get how police investigate these days. He doesn't get the internet. A missing persons case in contemporary time, you go straight to Friends Reunited and Facebook and Twitter. You get the name out there of the person, you try and find their friends, and you contact them that way. And Rebus is surrounded by all this technology and just doesn't get it. His way of policing is to go to the pub and have a network of informers and dodgy guys who he can get a favour from. So he's bewildered to a certain extent. The world has moved on and he hasn't. And at the same time, he's still close to the villain Cafferty, his nemesis in a way, who used to run Edinburgh, used to be the criminal who ran Edinburgh, for whom the world has also changed. And he is now surrounded by younger, hungrier gangsters who want what he's got and are prepared to do much more venal things than he is to get them. So you've got these two guys who are like dinosaurs. They're the last of their kind. And the world is slightly unforgiving or very unforgiving. And Rebus has slowed down to the extent that there is one punch-up in this book, one fight. But after about a minute, he's done in. He just can't do it anymore. Thankfully, so is the person he's fighting. And they just brush themselves off and decide to settle things over a drink upstairs. But it's just, I've got to get into my head that he's now in his early to mid-60s and he can't do the things he used to, He aches in the places where he used to play, as Leonard Cohen would say. And so it was very much a book about, a guy coming towards the end. So how many more books has he got left? I don't know. But I do get that sense that even if he was to rejoin the police, it wouldn't be for long. It was interesting when I started writing the book or started researching the book, because Scotland is changing. There's a lot of, maybe change, uncertainty in the air because we're not sure. In 2 years we could be an independent country or taking the first steps towards it. We don't know how that vote is going to go. So there's a lot of uncertainty, shifting sands because people's positions keep changing. The experts keep giving us different theories as to how well off the independent Scotland could be. We don't know who to trust. We don't know if there's an agenda. We don't seem to be getting facts and figures. So there's a lot of uncertainty. At the same time, in the police, there's a lot of uncertainty because they're just about to move from having lots of individual police authorities for the regions of Scotland to having one overarching police force with one guy at its head, because it's a male chief of police from Glasgow who's going to be in charge of it. So Rebus doesn't know what that's going to mean for his future. At the same time, the small cold case unit he works in, which really exists in Edinburgh, is about to be subsumed by a huge cold case unit that will cover the whole of Scotland. So in real life, his civilian job is in jeopardy. If he doesn't get back into the police, he might have no job at all. If he gets back into the police, it'll be a very different kind of police from what he's used to. At the same time, that police force will exist in a country that is changing. So, that old Chinese threat or proverb about may you live in interesting times, these are incredibly interesting times to be a writer in Scotland. And readers are looking for answers to a lot of these questions that they have And if they're not getting them from the politicians and the economists, they're looking to the creative people and saying, what do you think is going to happen? And we're always, I mean, all the writers in Scotland are being asked this constantly by the media and by, when we go travelling, people say, where's Scotland going to go in the next few years? One of the most interesting questions I got asked recently by a journalist wasn't how I'm going to vote in the election, which is the obvious one. It was, would independence be good for the arts in Scotland? And I thought about it, I thought, actually, probably yes. In the short term, certainly, because the independent government will be keen to show that they're culturally aware and that the arts are at the forefront of Scottish expression. How else does Scotland get known to the world except by its cultural products? So I think independence would be good for the arts. I'm not entirely satisfied it would be good for everything else.